Good afternoon, everybody. Our session is on how you can get more women in science. I'm very happy to be associated with this, and I'm thankful to the Indian Express Group and Sastra University for this. Though this session is on how to get more women in science, is but a small component of the two-day event. I hope it will act as a trigger for more serious discussions and, more importantly, for positive action. I find this is the only session which is dealing with women and science exclusively. We have an excellent panel who have done a lot of work on these aspects, and it will be very nice, and we are very fortunate to have them. Sri Pallam Garu, Professor Rohini Godbole, Professor Sunil Mukhi, distinguished members in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. While Sri Pallam Garu is former Union Minister for Human Resources Development, both Professor Godbole from Indian Institute of Science, a particle physicist first, and then Professor Mukhi from Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, also happens to work in particle physics, are both active members of several national panels constituted by the national academies on women in science. So absolutely apt for this. It augurs well for that. There are several questions to be addressed. Why are women are so poorly represented? There are several answers. Especially the number of women in physical sciences are absolutely low. Why is this? There is no one single answer for this, for the simple reason India is very diverse. We have different cultures, different societies, different economic backgrounds, so many others. So what is absolutely normal for a particular section may be unheard of somebody else. So it's very difficult to generalize, but still, I can say one thing. One perception is that science subjects are tough and science careers require longer working hours and not suitable for homemakers. So girls prefer art subjects like literature, philosophy, sociology, psychology, even fashion technology. So this is one reason we find there is a feeling that it's much better you go for softer subjects, because not that they are not bright enough to do the science subjects, but this is what is happening over the years. See, there is also a general perception that women are great in determination, dedication, hard work, grit, perseverance, but there is a but, less in intellect. This is a very wrong notion, and there are any number of studies to show this is not the case. But unfortunately, this wrong notion is due to perceived and presumed differences, which is repeated from childhood onwards by everybody, including parents. What does it lead to? It leads to low esteem, self-confidence in girls at a very tender age, and they start doubting their ability to succeed in science. However, all studies and surveys conducted so far prove that there is no measurable difference between men and women in intellect. See, I would like to give one experience. When I did science course some 5 decades ago, I was the only girl student at all levels, graduation, post-graduation, PhD level. Even if there are one or two, by the second term they used to drop off for various reasons. So that was the situation 5 decades ago. Perhaps things have improved now. I don't know whether it has improved substantially, but I'm sure there is some improvement. I'm sure more opinions will come from the panel. But I find one thing, most of the girls are also opting for engineering, especially electronics and computers, for various reasons, for job opportunities. And that is where, in fact, every girl asks, many times girls come to me, what do we do after doing our physics MSc? Are there enough opportunities for us? Where do we go? We tell them something, but they can get into projects which are which are only temporary for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, but they are looking for something much more permanent. So now let us go to the actual topic. in the sense how to get more of them. So the topic assumes the girls are needed, obviously, for obvious advantages in having, there is no question they are not wanted, but how to get them. So there are two ways of looking at it. What can the government do for us and what can the society can do for us? Government definitely has to create more opportunities by increasing the budget. That is one obvious thing. Maybe they should have more jobs, more scholarships, more schemes. Another thing is, can they relax, age relaxation for entry into government jobs? Because many often we find matrimony and childbearing, these are all part of women's life, and they are necessary blockades. Sometimes if you give extra age relaxation, it might help them. Or do you even suggest reservations for women? That's a drastic step. What can the society do? Society can do many things. The negative attitude toward girls in science education should be replaced by a proactive outreach. Another thing, the scientific institutes, universities should have a policy of mentoring young women scientists. So these are some of the thoughts. See, I am not a regular, I don't have any footprint on, social activities of women. I'm a pure scientist, and whatever I am saying is based on my experience as a woman scientist in space sciences. So I would like my panelists to respond and take. I would request Pallam Raju garu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to congratulate the New Indian Express and Sri Prabhu Chawla for this excellent choice of topic, and I think it's a highly relevant topic of the day. But I'm afraid this panel is not suffering from a gender bias, but as we speak before lunch, it's faced against a hunger bias. So I would ask all of you to bear with me while each of us present our points of view, and then we get into the discussion. This, like I said, is a very interesting and important panel discussion, which is highly relevant as the human race evolves, becoming more conscious and proactive of issues that are affecting us, and the progress of science that is impacting the quality of our lives and the sustainability of the planet. As the world of today faces more challenges due to the dynamics of strife, economics, population growth, increasing aspirations, and global politics, the role of science becomes increasingly important towards finding solutions and innovations that give a positive edge to growth and to find sustainable solutions to age-old and new problems. The role of women in science is paramount, as it is my belief that women are more empathetic and farsighted in their quests in science and research and their applications for the betterment of the human race. In my remarks, I would like to mention briefly the historic contribution of women in science and the betterment of our understanding, and then gradually address the topic of the panel discussion. Women have made significant contributions to science from the earliest of times and across the ages. Historians with an interest in gender and science have illuminated the scientific endeavors and accomplishments of women, the barriers they had faced, and how they had to struggle to have their work peer-reviewed and accepted in major scientific journals and other publications. I believe that the historical, critical, and sociological study of these issues has become an academic discipline in its own right. A little bit of ancient history. The involvement of women in the field of medicine occurred in several early civilizations, and the study of natural philosophy in ancient Greece was open to women. Women contributed to the proto-science of alchemy in the 1st and the 2nd centuries AD. During the Middle Ages, convents were an important place of education for women, and some of these communities provided opportunities for women to contribute to scholarly research. The 11th century saw the emergence of the first universities. Women were, for the most part, excluded from university education. However, there are some exceptions. The Italian University of Bologna, for example, allowed women to attend lectures from its inception in 1088. The attitude to educating women in medical fields in Italy appears to have been more liberal than in other places. The physician Trotula held a chair at the medical school of Salerno in the 11th century, and several influential texts on women's medicine dealing with obstetrics and gynecology, among other topics, are also attributed to Trotula. The first woman to earn a university chair in the scientific field of studies was the Italian scientist Laura Bassi. She was the third woman in the Western world to obtain an academic qualification and was central to introducing Newton's ideas of physics and natural philosophy to southern Europe, presenting numerous dissertations on the issues of gravity. Laura Bassi, as a member of the Italian Academy of the Institute of Sciences and a chair of the Institute of Experimental Physics, became the world's first female professor. In maths, another Italian, Maria Agnesi, was the first woman to write a mathematics handbook and the first woman appointed as a mathematics professor at a university. In 1748, she wrote one of the first and most complete works on finite and infinitesimal analysis. A German, Maria Marian, a founder of modern botany and zoology, spent her life investigating nature like caterpillars and studying their metamorphosis into butterflies. In her first book publication, The New Book of Flowers, she used imagery to catalogue the lives of plants and insects. Journeying to Paramaribo for 2 years to observe insects, science, birds, reptiles, and amphibians, she published The Metamorphosis of the Insects of Suriname, thereby revealing to Europeans for the first time the astonishing diversity of the rainforests. Although gender roles were largely defined in the 18th century, women experienced great advances in science. During the 19th century, women were excluded from most formal scientific education, but they began to be admitted into learned societies during the period. In the later 19th century, the rise of the Women's College provided jobs for women scientists and opportunities for education. Elizabeth Garnet Anderson became the first British woman to gain a medical qualification in 1865. With Sophie Blake, American Elizabeth Blackwell, and others, Garrett Anderson founded the first UK medical school to train women, the London School of Medicine for Women, in 1874. Despite the significant contribution of women in science, no woman was, however, invited to either the Royal Society of London nor the French Academy of Science until the 20th century. Most people in the 17th century viewed a life devoted to any kind of scholarship as being at odds with the domestic duties women were expected to perform. Amongst the many notable Indian women who had tread the path of science and discovery, I would like to but mention 14 women that India can be proud for their contributions. Can I have the slide, please? For the paucity of time, I'm rushing through the slides instead of talking about the merits of each of these accomplished women. I hope you will understand. Alice Perry is understood to be the first woman to graduate with a degree in civil engineering in 1906 at Queen's College, Ireland. Lisa Meitner played a major role in the discovery of nuclear fission as head of the physics section at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. Maria Montessori was the first woman in southern Europe to qualify as a physician. She invented an interest in the diseases of children and in the necessity of those recognized to be ineducable. In the case of the latter, she argued for the development of training for teachers along Freudian lines and developed a principle that was also to inform her general educational program, which is the first, the education of the senses, then the education of the intellect. Montessori introduced a teaching program that allowed defective children to read and write. She sought to teach skills not by having children repeatedly try it, but by developing exercises that prepare them. The above are just a few examples of the great strides made by women in science and research and their humane applications towards the betterment of the world. Overall, the scientific revolution did little to change people's ideas about the nature of women. According to Jackson Spelvogel, male scientists used the new science to spread the view that women were by nature inferior and subordinate to men and suited to play a domestic role as nurturing mothers. Somehow these traditional biases seem to be continuing in this age and day too. Even as recently as last year, Nobel laureate Tim Hunt stirred a hornet's nest at the World Conference of Science Journalists at Seoul with a statement about why the presence of women scientists in the laboratory was distracting. The reason very few in the research world found Hunt's remarks funny is because women scientists have for decades been fighting bias and the suggestion that they are not cut out for the lab. Women are underrepresented, underpaid, and often unrecognized for their scientific achievements. In the early 1980s, Margaret Rossiter presented two concepts for understanding the statistics behind women in sciences, as well as the disadvantages women continue to suffer. She coined the terms hierarchical segregation and territorial segregation. I'm sure both of you can relate to those two terms. The former term described phenomenon in which the further one goes up the chain of command in the field, the smaller the presence of women. The latter describes a phenomenon in which women cluster in scientific disciplines. This is a well-known phenomenon in society that the higher the level and rank of power and prestige, the smaller the population of females participating. The hierarchical differences point out that there are fewer women participating at higher levels of both academia and industry. The second concept included in Rossiter's explanation of women in science is territorial segregation. The term refers to how female employment is often clustered in specific industries or categories in industries. Let me talk about the Nobel laureates. The Nobel Prize and Prize in Economic Sciences have been awarded to women 49 times between 1901 and 2015, with Marie Curie having been honored twice. This means that 48 women in total have been awarded the Nobel Prize between 1901 and 2015. However, only 16 have been awarded the Nobel Prize in physics, chemistry, physiology, or medicine. Women make up a bit more than half of the world's population. Yet, even in the most developed countries, men hold the lion's share of jobs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. What's more, men take home most of the prestigious scientific awards, which includes the Nobel Prizes, widely considered the ultimate mark of scientific achievement. Of the 357 people awarded a Nobel in the science categories, only 16 have been women. What accounts for this discrepancy? This low representation is likely due to there unfortunately being very few women scientists in the first half of the 20th century. Until the 1970s, the number of women who achieved Nobel Prizes was roughly proportional to the number of women doing scientific research. A small group of women winning a small number of Nobels. But as the number of women in science has increased over the past 40 years, women Nobelists remain the exception. It is important to look at the factors outside of academia that are occurring in women's lives. At the same time, they're pursuing their continued education and career search. The most outstanding factor that is occurring at this crucial time is family formation. As women are continuing their academic careers, they're also stepping into their new role as a wife and a mother. These are two things that require at large time commitment and presence at the home. Unfortunately, these new commitments do not fare well for the person looking to attain tenure. That is why women entering the family formation period of their life are 35% less likely to pursue tenure positions after receiving their PhDs than their male counterparts. The good news is that there is an increasing number of women receiving an education in the sciences in India. Working in science has not been easy for women with its long hours, societal biases, and the need to get married and have children in between. I would like to mention some of the efforts, international efforts. I won't want to get into the details, but I'm sure everybody is aware of the UK Women into Science, Engineering and Construction campaign and the UK Resource Centre for Women in SET. This is some of the mentions. Similarly, the Association for Women in Science in the United States plays a good role in bringing about gender neutrality, and also the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. I would want to get into detail for the paucity of time. Speaking of the national efforts, we have the postdoctoral fellowship for women by the United University Grants Commission. We have an initiative by the Ministry of Science and Technology called Kiran. And I would also like to mention the initiatives taken by the Indian Academy of Sciences, which I'm sure Professor Godbole would be happy to talk about when she speaks about them. I would like to end my speech with some of the successes that we've had in attracting more girls into science and retaining them. And in that, I would like to quote the example of the IISERs, the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, which were started in the previous government. I got to talk to some of them at the IISER at Mohali, and I believe that the number of students is almost 40%. And in terms of the academic performance, they've been doing pretty well. And another important feature there is that I believe in IISERs, one of the things they encourage is if both the husband and wife are equally suited for their roles, they are taken in as a couple, which is not the story, I believe, in other academic institutions. Due to paucity of time, I wouldn't want to talk more, but I'm sure that it will be a very positive debate today with people like Professor Godbole and Professor Mukhi and Dr. Lakshmi on this panel. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Hello everyone. So it's a great pleasure to be here. But I have to tell you that when I was invited to this, I was a little puzzled at first because I don't see myself as the main expert on this question, how to get more women into science. I passionately believe in it, but I do think that women would be the ideal people to tell you the answer, and we have two in this panel, and I think we've already heard Dr. Lakshmi, and we'll hear Professor Godbole, who I've known for a very long time, and who has done extensive research and extensive work on the subject specifically of how to promote the cause of women in science. So what is it that I can tell you in 5 or 7 minutes? And I thought, well, there's one thing that I can do. So I am actually a man, and I think the problem is mostly due to men, or historically at least it's been due to men. And so I'm going to be very negative and tell you what are all the terrible things that men have done and continue to do, which make it very difficult for women to have a level playing field in science. Now, obviously, I'll offend a few people, and if that happens, then I'll consider my talk was a success. So I hope I annoy you. And I'm going to start just by a very quick reference to the history that Pallam Raju ji mentioned very nicely. There was a German mathematician called Emmy Noether who has a spectacular piece of work to her credit that I studied in grad school. And the reason University of Erlangen could not admit her at first was that their Senate passed a rule that mixed-sex education would overthrow all academic order. Okay, so in 1900, women were terrorists. If they came into academic institutions, all academic order would go to hell. This was an official resolution. They relaxed it for her because she was brilliant. They relaxed it for two women. But they didn't relax it fully. They said, look, you can only audit classes. You cannot register for classes. You can only audit them. And you have to ask every professor for permission whether you can attend his class, because there were no professors who were giving her class. They were all male professors. Okay? Despite all these obstacles, she completed her degree. So what we see is that ab initio, before you even know who the person is, you make a rule that women are not fit, not suitable for this job. And then if some woman turns out to be a genius, as this one was, then you put a lot of hurdles in her path to see if you can trip her up at stage A, B, C, or D. And then if she makes it, you say, well, after all, so maybe women are not so bad. She got through. Now just imagine the impact of this on other women who were maybe not geniuses, but simply very, very good as men who were in universities. This is a kind of history of the subject, and it's not only ancient history, it's a living history, and it's living in India too. Now, as Rohini Godbole will, I think, tell you, there are actually a good, decent number of women, proportion of women in science, right up to PhD level. The numbers fluctuate between 30 to 40%. It's not such a bad, it's not so far from 50% as you would think. So it's something to consider positively. But when it comes to a career in research, as a faculty member doing research, then the number plummets sharply. And there's a very, very sharp decline in proportion of women as faculty, and even more sharp when it comes to making them chairs, deans, vice chancellors, and so on. Now, I'll just identify, I have a very short amount of time left, and I'll quickly identify two things. One is, there are some things that I think men do very, very badly and deliberately. Now, these are not probably most men, but there are some men who do this in all institutions. One is that there are men, and I have to say this, it's very blunt, who do not like to work with women colleagues. And the women colleagues know this very soon. They simply won't talk to the woman colleague as a colleague. In their mind, every time they see the woman colleague, it's like, this is a woman, this is a woman. Not, this is a physicist who happens to know particle physics, and I could talk particle physics or biology or chemistry with her. And there are also, and I'm sorry to say I've seen a few examples, of men who cannot agree to work under a woman boss. Now, this might be a problem also in industry. It might not only be a problem of science or academia. But I have seen cases of men being deliberately disruptive when the boss is a woman, so that the boss simply keeps feeling hurt and embarrassed and humiliated and cannot possibly function. And this is something I think blatantly unethical. The only good thing is it's a very small proportion of men, I believe, who do this, but it's there, it's happening, and we cannot ignore it. Also, we cannot prove it. Sometimes you get a sense that this is happening. Now, the other phenomenon which is very interesting is what I call the men's club phenomenon, which is that important decisions in institutions in India as in other places, and I think here England is sort of the place from where many of these structures come, is that there's a kind of men meet and take important decisions in committees where the atmosphere is very male and there's not somehow room or comfort for a woman to be there, or a woman may not be allowed to be there, even if she's very senior. Examples of men's clubs you probably know are, for example, the councils of our academies and so on. Nowadays they all have sort of one woman, but this is, it's good, but it's also a little bit tokenist. It's like, okay, so can we find one woman for this men's club, and then the rest of it can be a men's club. So these are all very unfortunate things, and I think the impact of these on an aspiring woman scientist has to be very, very negative and discouraging. And the third thing, we have had a lot of praise from the speakers this morning for all the young people in the audience, but I would like to blame some of you also, and I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. So 2 years back, I taught a course jointly with a young woman physicist in my institute who's an experimental high-energy physicist. And I found we were alternately giving lectures, and I found it was her first course. She was much younger than me, and I found the students being just a little disrespectful because she was new to teaching, a new faculty member. After 2 months, when it was my turn to give a class, I went up and I said, do you students know what is the Higgs boson? Have you read about it? They said, yes, Higgs boson discovery in Geneva, very important. I said, do you know anybody who is a co-author of the paper where the Higgs boson was discovered, the published paper on the discovery of the Higgs boson? And they were blank. Then I said, you do know somebody? And they said, Seema ma'am? I said, yes, Seema ma'am. Same person who writes equations on the blackboard for you is an author, is a co-author, co-discoverer of the Higgs boson. They didn't know because they assumed that a woman faculty member could not have such an incredibly high stature. This is one of the highest stature people we have in our institute, and she's one of the youngest, and she's a woman. Just a fact. So I think students also have a bias, and I see students sometimes treating women faculty badly to a level that they definitely don't deserve. Okay. So now let me be a little more constructive, and in 2 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2? Okay. Okay, a few things that are not so negative but which don't work positively for women have to do with sensitivity. So I think most men in academic institutes, if you ask them, they'll say, yes, we are very gender friendly, we are gender neutral, we would like women to participate in everything. But women complain. If you ask women what the issue is, they will complain. Timings of things are sometimes fixed arbitrarily at 6 p.m. We have to all gather for a meeting at 6 p.m. Okay? Now, this may not suit the woman faculty member if she has to pick up a child from daycare. Ideally, of course, her husband can pick up the child from daycare, but that's not always, that the institute can't do much about that. But then she gets looked at like, it's always you, so you're the one why we can't ever find a time to have a meeting. So this makes people hurt in a way which makes it harder for them to function. Couples were referred to by Pallam Rajuji. Many Indian institutes had an official ban which they were proud of, that they'll never hire a married couple as faculty members, and they keep saying that, well, they will take each other's side in faculty meetings. Okay? As it was mentioned yesterday by someone, you never say that if two brothers are faculty members in the same institute. And what's worse is when it comes to couples, and because of this ban, very often the following mentoring is done. You go to the woman scientist who might actually be the better of the two. I know many examples where the woman scientist clearly has a higher profile than her husband, both in the same field. But people go to her and say, for the sake of your husband and for the institute, why don't you just become a librarian, or why don't you get a job in the neighboring school? I'm not saying anything wrong with these jobs. I'm just saying you will not go to a man and tell him, why don't you get a job in the neighboring school or become a librarian for the sake of your wife? And these are things which people sense at every stage. I have objected for many years to the seminar announcements which say doctor in brackets Mrs. or professor in brackets Ms. or Miss. Why do you have to specify whether the doctor or professor is a woman when you don't specify if it's a man? You are saying normally it's a man, so by the way, this is a woman. We have to point out that this is a woman, otherwise you may come expecting a man to give the talk. Okay. And of course, you often hear that women who are forceful in discussions and committees are called aggressive or hysterical, but if men are in the same way assertive, they are called forceful or decisive. So, language works a lot. Okay. Now, let me just conclude with 2 or 3 things. I think Indian institutes have to stop shying away from the neutrality statement in our ads. We keep putting ads in papers and internet saying we are looking for PhD students, faculty, this, that. This institute does not discriminate on the grounds of gender and many other things which we should, gender, religion, sexual orientation, transgender, lots of things that we need to put, but women is one of the important things. We think it's already implicit, but we must say it. Once we say it, the interview committee will know that we are not supposed to be discriminating, neither for nor against. Okay? At higher levels, women very rarely get selected for being things like deans, positions like deans and chairpersons. I don't understand why, because the ones I know who are in these positions have done very well. It stands to reason there must be many more. We should be a little alert to that. Okay, and finally, my last statement is that one has to take a mature approach. We can't just say, well, there has to be legislation that women are treated equally. It will never work. There are prejudices. We must be honest and correct them. But one lesson is that the day when there are 50% women in science faculties and science institutions, that day we can stop worrying about the problem, because those women will certainly ensure that as part of the system, there will not be discrimination anymore. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much.
like this. Computer. Because when the computer is being set up, I'm not going to project slides, but I want to see here what I'm saying so that I don't go either out of time or out of control. Because as you can imagine, this is a subject which is really after my heart. And I can go on for hours. I will not.
9 minutes.
I think this should be fine, as long as people can hear me. Okay. 1 second. Even if they don't see. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, first and foremost, let me thank Indian Express, New Indian Express, for including in a 2-day deliberation on policy subject of women in science. Because this is something I have personally been championing, and I have sat on many committees, many groups where we have discussed science policies, but women in science has never been a part of that subject. So this is really a first for New Indian Express, and I hope that continues that way. So what am I going to say in the next 7 minutes or 8 minutes is few comments on how to increase the number of women in science. These are some suggestions on the steps that need to be taken to increase the numbers, but not just increase the numbers, but increase the efficiency of participation by women in science for those that Sunil has described, who have come through the hard way, who have made it there. Now, how can they contribute to the fullest? How can one enable? So enabling mechanisms are equally necessary. And before I do that, I should also tell you, where does my information or whatever comments I'm going to make come from? First, of course, they come just like Dr. Lakshmi. They come from a life in science for 40 years. And life in science as a woman scientist, because I'm both a scientist and I'm a woman. I was invited, and I started this exercise because I was invited by the International Pure and Applied Physics as one of the 9 speakers as Asia's success story to talk about what is it to be a woman physicist in India in 2001. And actually that started me thinking. And that is when I started my most engagement. I've been one of the editors of the report that was brought out by Indian National Science Academy on science career for women in India, which was in 2004. And that was the first report of its kind, which collected some numbers. And I'm going to tell you things that are based on those numbers. I'm also been the chair of the panel for women in science of the Indian Academy of Sciences, as well as Indian National Science Academy. And I'm also a member, along with Dr. Mukhi here, of the joint panel of the 3 academies for women in science. So as you can see, the academies have tried to do something, and I think we need to go further, and that's what I want to tell you. And we have also made a survey report along with social scientists on trained scientific women power. What fraction are we losing and why? I also ended up editing 2 books. One of them is called Leelavati's Daughters, which was partially to tell that if I go to either a student, a young person, an old person, and ask them, can you name 2 women scientists of India? Or first you say, can you name 2 women scientists? The answers will be Marie Curie, Dorothy Hodgkins, and then we will perhaps go with the other names that were told by Dr. Pallam Raju. But the point is, this book actually gave stories of 100 women scientists who worked and practiced in modern India. So, as recently as last few months, we brought out a report on women in science and technology in Asia. So what I'm trying to say is that over this period of 12-15 years, I have collected some numbers. And what can we say? That at least in academia, women are not perceived as being incapable of intellectual achievement. However, in fact, many of the university prize winners, gold medalists are women. However, we don't have our Larry Summers, we don't have our Mr. Hunt, but we still we are not inundated with women doing science. So, oh God, what happened here? Something funny happened, one moment. Sorry, because I don't want to break my... Okay. I want to make one point here, that when I'm championing a cause of increasing the inclusivity, it's not for women alone. It's not as a charity for women. It's not for saying that poor women, let us give full rein to their abilities. But it's more because inclusivity, even in this context, just like the other context that we had been discussing, improves the quality of science and technology. The pursuit of excellence in science needs to avoid the loss that is there due to insufficient or inefficient participation by women. And academia really needs to worry about it. Actually, as the numbers that Sunil was mentioning, today 35% of university science students are women. 25% of the total PhDs in science are women. But then what happens when they go to faculties? In the faculty positions, at the most, 10% are women. And when you go to institutes like my institute, Indian Institute of Science, or his institute is an exception, in fact, you find that there are very few women. They are even further less when they are VCs, even less when they go to, governing councils of big institutions. So they don't have a say, as though they are not capable of telling what science is all about. So our problem is not in finding women who study science. Our problem is not finding women who can teach science. Our problem is in finding women and appreciating and accepting the fact that women can do science. In fact, the representation of women in all the major scientific awards in India is very, very low. The famous Bhatnagar Award has gone only to about 20 Indian women and 425 men since the beginning of the inception of the award. And I refuse to think that the ratio is as skewed as that in terms of abilities. Many of our major scientific institutions have never had a woman director. Now, what's really happening, therefore, is that there are very serious leakages in the pipeline from university to a PhD to a science career. And how do you remediate? So our remedies have to be our own. India has to devise its own remedies. We can't follow what the UK or the US is doing because their problems are different. Our problems are our own. So our problems are not so much to attract and convince the girls that please come and do science, you can do it. Give them the confidence that you can study it. No, they know it. They do it well. Somewhere along the line, they get lost. So our challenge is to attract them to careers in science. Our challenge is to convince them that a woman can have a career in science. And at the same time, equally essential, is to create pathways by which a very successful science career can be negotiated among all the various difficulties that are there on the way. And again, right now, there are a lot of measures. Actually, I'm very proud to say, Indian government and the Department of Science and Technology in particular has really a lot of very positive, proactive ways. But again, all those methods, all those measures are decided by committee. You guessed it, a lot of men, maybe a few handful of women like me. What we need to do is something much more different. What we have done is good, but it's not enough. So we need to develop mechanisms whereby a woman can negotiate a science career professionally, creating awareness for this fact, not just among the girls and the women, but among the society at large, and in particular, force the scientific institutions to be able to implement that is the need of the time. With the increased spending on science, which we have sort of now done over the last decade, one of the issues is human resource development. But the point is, there are two aspects to human resource. One is the development, and the second is deployment. And in case of women, we fail miserably in the deployment. And the measures that we want to have are those measures. The societal measures, mindset measures were already talked about, and I'm not going to cover that. And most of the initiatives of my panel that were listed here are actually initiatives on that front. I don't want to talk about what has been done, but I rather want to dwell upon what we must do. And here that is more or less at the level of policy. where we want academicians, I think, have done and set in motion things they can do. Now the time has come to talk to the government and to have some policy changes. For example, one of the policy changes which we had suggested, and I found resonance in Sunil's comments, I would like advertisements to say, we do not have a policy of not hiring husbands and wife together. You don't want to hire a woman, tell her that we don't want to hire you. We don't like the science you do. But don't tell her that, we would have liked to hire you, but we don't hire you because your husband, we want to hire your husband. And that is what I'm sorry to say happens today. So therefore, what is it that you want to do? There are two important things. One is, please ask the women who leave science, why do they leave? And in fact, we conducted a survey like that, and we found that their answers were very different than what me even, or men like Sunil, who are very sympathetic, what we think why women leave science and why they themselves leave are very different reasons. We need to talk to them. We made a very small survey. We had only 1,200 women. But I think such data analysis is the need of the time before we finally decide. But even before that happens, the simple things that we can do, always people say flexi time. Then, of course, the other thing is ways and means for women to come back to research in science. Because science is a very specific thing. The time when you want to make your career is also the time you can have children. The body clock ticks. It doesn't stop for anybody. And it is quite different compared to any other profession. So therefore, these are the two very good schemes that have been introduced by the government. But I think those are the typical men solutions where you assume that finally it is up to the woman to find a career and family balance, and therefore we should give her ways and means in which she can find that balance. But we don't even once think that we need to create a mindset where that responsibility is not just of that woman, but it is the responsibility of the family with whom they have to find a career and family balance. So, of course, very simple measures which we have given in many reports that we have brought out is a good creche on every campus. High priority to young couples for campus housing. You might think these are very trivial things, but they don't exist. For example, I think I shared this with her. When I was young, we didn't even find a washroom on every floor of the biggest research institutes in the country. These are the kinds of things you must do, but they are very simple. But what you really need to do further, and that's where I want to end, I have already said proactive hiring policies for helping couples to manage dual careers, which was already mentioned, and improve work climate. I want to end on that note. We need to have, and we need to include we need to think about harassment issues. Let us not shy away from them. And let us not just think that harassment means only sexual harassment. There is a gender harassment. And we need to think about this issue, how to avoid it, and not just that. If there are any instances of a person having been proved, though not in a court of law, about having been an harasser, we need to think, academicians need to think, and formulate a way how to deal with situations for these people if we are going to hire them back into a position of power. Not in terms of doing science, but in terms of position of power. And last but not the least is we need to introduce something which I call gender audit. That all the institutes, and this is not quota, all the institutes can decide their own goals. That you say, okay, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, with the subject that it pursues, cannot have more than 20% of women on its as scientists. Fine, that's a good goal. But then you ask Tata Institute every year when government funds it, where have you reached? And modalities of such audit will have to be figured out. And for that purpose, you need a group. And in fact, one of the things that I think it's really the need of time is to have what is called a standing committee for women in science. In fact, that was one of the recommendations of one of our studies. A standing committee was formed maybe 2 governments ago, but the standing committee, to my sorrow, has always been standing and has not even once met. So I would really request that such a standing committee is really important. There exist programs like this in UK, and we need to really develop such systems. And I think more or less I have said all the things. One point I want to say, that lack of numerical representation and methods to achieve it, yes, it's a symptom. Don't forget that by achieving these goals, you have not removed the problem has to be addressed exactly in the ways that has been talked about by all the three people, and that's where I think we need to go on and think about it. We need to have a level playing field for women. By and large, I used to say that that's enough, but there is something called epistemic injustice, as Miranda Africa talks about. So therefore, changing attitudes on the part of the women and the men is equally important. Thank you very much.
See, Professor Godbole mentioned about level playing field. In this connection, I would like to say one thing. Self-esteem and confidence for women will be high if more of them are made members, chairpersons of scientific committees, and by involving them in various other science activities. That should tell them they have arrived. Unless they get that feeling, they will not be attracting many. So that is very important. For that, we need mentors who can encourage science students at every level so that they can express their views very freely. Many times when young girls come, they have some sort of hesitation. That should go. That will happen only, especially when they come from smaller towns. They are very diffident about telling what they feel like because they are always in awe of the senior people. But that should go. That's what I feel. See, in summary, I can say, if science is the key development of any country, we just cannot ignore and leave out 50% of population from science career. Not including half the population in a pool of possible scientists is short-sighted and self-limiting. So there are a lot of things were discussed. Inclusivity, special programs, standing committee. I think these are all very good suggestions. Now I invite people to respond.
Dr. Lakshmi, can I make one addition? Dr. Lakshmi, can I just add one sentence? The mentorship issue that you mentioned is extremely important. And in fact, the few initiatives that Dr. Pallam Raju had displayed from the webpage of the Indian Academy of Sciences are actually such mentorship programs. And we just need many, many more of them.
We need a lot of cooperation from men also.
Oh, yes. Involve men.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. I think that brought out a lot of valid points and was very interesting to listen to. But because we're running past our schedule, is it possible for us to take questions offline? Will that be okay? You'd like to? Okay. We'll just do one or two very quick questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Trivikram from Hindustan University. My question to you is this. Now, the topic of the debate is how can we get more women into science? Now, my question to you is this. How can you hope to get more women into science when you brand them as individuals who require perks and benefits to be placed at a level equal to men and that of scientific pursuit?
Sorry, are you understanding the question? I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think anybody suggested they require any perks or benefits. All one suggested is that the existing obstacles that lie in their path should be removed. Everything that all of us suggested is in the direction of removing obstacles which are unfair and should have never been there in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. One last question before we conclude the session. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin with one remark, if that is all right, before I ask my question.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah,
please.
so the person who asked the panel the question before me, I believe the reason why we need feminism is very, very blatant right here. Because we hear perks, benefits, and associate them with something that, puts them at a pedestal above men. But what I think is you're balancing out the issues that women have been put through for years and years of patriarchal misogyny. My question to you is, why is STEM still, not a thing here in India? Even though, we've been talking about trying to integrate women into scientific careers. I understand that there is quite a lot of, details that go into integrating women and science together, but why haven't been, what is the real obstacle that stands between, making this happen from an institutional level?
You want to take it? I think I tried I think some of these obstacles were described by Dr. Mukhi here, is that it mostly comes from mindsets. So if I may use a word that my old grandmother used to say, we don't say no by mouth, we say no by hand. So most of the time, the final numbers are small, the final act of integration has not happened because of the acts of omission and not so much acts of commission. That is really my understanding of the situation.
Beautifully said. And with that, we'd like to effectively conclude this session. I request Mr. Prabhu Chawla, our editorial director, to kindly join us on stage and present our speakers with mementos as a note of thanks and appreciation that we have for your valuable time.